Has the Empire, Geoboxing Empire, Boxing Boxing. Nah, man, my boy Roy Jones Jr., man, the GOAT, the living legend himself, says that Terence Crawford, man, he has a better resume than Errol Spence Jr., and that Errol Spence needs to fight some better competition. Now, man, this is mind-boggling stuff from Roy Jones Jr., man. Everyone knows the only unified champion at welterweight is Errol Spence Jr. You know, the guy has fought in a lot of tough opposition, and Terence Crawford had some big wins, but they're earlier in his career, and they certainly weren't at 147, man. Now, you know, Roy Jones Jr. talks about how Errol Spence Jr., his biggest win was Kell Brook, and Kell Brook was damaged goods by the time that Errol Spence got to him because Triple G broke his left eye socket. I believe it was his right eye socket. But, you know, Errol Spence Jr. broke the opposite eye socket of Kell Brook, which was his left eye socket. Furthermore, man, a lot of people don't know Terence Crawford. You know, when he first won his world title, he actually fought a fighter, and the guy had a broken jaw the prior fight, right? And that fighter I'm talking about is Ray Beltran. Ray Beltran had his jaw broken, and I'm sorry, Ricky Burns. I'm so sorry, Ricky Burns. He traveled to the UK and fought him, right? Broken jaw. So that was Terence Crawford's biggest win, but the guy was damaged goods, just like Errol Spence fighting Kell Brook was damaged goods, right? So, you know, the thing is, the difference between Errol Spence and Terence Crawford, in my opinion, is a lot of fighters that Terence Crawford fought, you know, they were good at one point in time, but after they lost to Terence Crawford, they never were the same, and they really didn't become champion ever again ever since their loss, right? It's just facts, right? Yuriorkis Gamboa has been a punching bag for everyone ever since he lost to Terence Crawford, right? He actually went on to lose to a nobody a couple fights later after Terence Crawford, right? Same thing with Victor Postal. He went off the radar for a very, very, very long time. John Molina Jr., et cetera, right? You got people like Jeff Horn and Amir Khan. They're not in the talks for any big fights at welterweight at this moment, you know? And the thing is, all Terence Crawford's wins, you know, Errol Spence beat Sean Porter, right? I think Sean Porter can beat every single person on Terence Crawford's resume. And furthermore, Errol Spence is set to fight Danny Garcia, which I think that Danny Garcia would beat everyone on Terence Crawford's resume. You know, it's just really shocking to me that Roy Jones Jr. would say something like Errol Spence hasn't fought any of the best competition yet. Another thing about Errol Spence is, you know, when he was coming up, man, he was considered a boogeyman. For sure, he was considered a boogeyman. People were ducking him. You know, you had the infamous rivalry between Errol Spence Jr. and Keith One-Time Thurman. Thurman did not want to fight Errol Spence for anything. You couldn't pay him enough money to fight this guy. And to this day, that's a fight that people want to see, but Keith Thurman still, you know, hasn't signed the contract. He talks about, he always says he wants to fight, but I mean, at this point, we don't need to hear about it anymore. We need to see that fight signed. And it never happened. You know, you had a lot of fighters that were mandatories to Errol Spence Jr., right? I can't pronounce his name. The guy is Quadritillo. The guy is from he's from some weird part of the world, but the guy was the mandatory for Errol Spence Jr., and he decided not to fight the guy. You know, there's a lot of mandatories that Errol Spence Jr. had that they just didn't want to take the fight, right? I mean, if you're not a big name in the welterweight and you are a former world champion, a lot of people really don't want to fight Errol Spence Jr. And, you know, now that Errol Spence Jr. has become a bigger star, and now that his star has risen and the checks are getting fatter and fatter, people are more willing to fight Errol Spence Jr. But before then, you know, Errol Spence Jr. was seen as the boogeyman. And as good as Terence Crawford is, man, the guy is not seen as a boogeyman at all at the welterweight division. He seems a skilled fighter, but a dangerous one that everyone's ducking. No one's ducking Terence Crawford, man. No one's ducking at Terence Crawford. So, you know, the thing is, Errol Spence Jr., man, you know, he was fighting elite competition his whole career. Even coming up, he was seen as a boogeyman, and I just think his resume is overall superior to Terence Crawford. Not only that, the fighters he beat can beat everyone on Terence Crawford's resume. Like I said, a Sean Porter and definitely a Danny Garcia when that fight happens. Assuming Errol Spence wins. So yeah, man, Terence Crawford, phenomenal fighter, but those were good fighters who achieved being a champion, but they never held the position of being an elite level fighter for a long period of time. That's the problem with Terence Crawford. That's the problem with Terence Crawford. So we're gonna see how this whole thing plays out with Terence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. Maybe Terence Crawford fights a bigger name. A lot of people want to see some common opponents between Terence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. A lot of people really want to see Terence Crawford versus Kell Brook, me being one of them. I think that's a great fight if it takes place in the UK. There's a lot of fights that's so compelling because that's how deep Errol Spence's resume is. It's so good that could he even beat Errol Spence leftovers? A lot of people are saying that right now. No one's pushing for Errol Spence Jr. versus Jeff Horn. No one's doing that. This facts, right? No one is saying we want to see Errol Spence versus Amir Khan. I think Amir Khan's a phenomenal fighter, but no one's asking for that. A lot of people would want to see a Terence Crawford versus Sean Porter, a Terence Crawford versus Kell Brook. The list goes on and on. I still would really want to see. I think his toughest fight would definitely be a Sean Porter at welterweight. So we're gonna see how this whole thing plays out, man. But yeah, man, I think Virgil Jr. is far off for this one, man. Errol Spence definitely has a deeper resume. The fighters he fought stayed elite for longer, and it wasn't like some, the guy champion happened to be in the right place at the right time and managed to get the title. These are fighters who stayed elite and are still elite till this day. Everyone that Terence Crawford beat, his biggest names, a lot of them, they're not there anymore. They're not talked about in big fights. With the exceptions of a Yuriorkis Gamboa, but it's just because he's a big name. I'm talking about who can run the division. Sean Porter is still relevant in the welterweight division. Danny Garcia is still relevant in the welterweight division. I can go on and on. But yeah, man, let me know how you guys feel about it, though. Like, comment, subscribe. This is the Empire. Geoboxing Empire. Peace.